The movie opens on a broad highway with a pretty girl driving a car while enjoying the music and the ride. She overtakes a truck, but another truck is approaching from the opposite direction. She swerves her car to avoid it, but the maneuver doesn't work. The back of her car collides with the oncoming truck, causing the vehicle to spin across the road. Moments later, the first truck crashes into her. The next scene shows a couple, John and his wife, Denise, watching the news at night. Eventually, John hears some voices outside. He runs out and discovers that the police are repossessing his wife's car because they failed to pay the bank loan. Denise is devastated because her car has been taken and they don't have the money to get it back. We can tell that they're an ordinary family, living on the edge financially, but not in extreme poverty. John reassures her that he will receive his paycheck soon and that everything will be okay. At that moment, their son Mike arrives. He's a die-hard baseball fan who dreams of becoming a professional player in the future. It's clear that they're a loving family. The next day, all three family members ride together in John's car. John heads to work, Mike goes to school, and Denise goes to the restaurant where she works. Music is playing in the car, and they're laughing and joking together. When John drops him off at school and says goodbye, Mike insists that he should say, "See you later." Goodbyes really hurt.
Bye, Mike.
Not goodbye. Remember, see you later.
All right, see you later.
John works as a part-time laborer at a steel mill with his friend Jimmy. He's highly qualified, and we later learn that he's pursuing a better position. He's about to attend an interview for that job. When they arrive, they discover that there are 400 applicants competing for a single opening. Jimmy tells him that no one will really get the job because the HR department will probably give it to one of their relatives anyway. In the end, HR rejects John, saying that he's overqualified. The next day is Sunday, and the family attends church like they always do. Afterward, they head to Mike's baseball game. This is part of their normal routine, and they're happy with their simple life. But this Sunday turns into a nightmare when Mike suddenly collapses while playing baseball. He's rushed to the hospital. Denise is so overwhelmed that she's unintentionally making it difficult for the nurses to do their jobs. A nurse asks the parents to provide a blood sample so Mike can be admitted. Meanwhile, the hospital receptionist fills out the necessary paperwork. Jimmy and his wife soon arrive at the hospital. None of them have any idea about the tragedy that's about to unfold. A few moments later, Mike is stabilized but remains unable to speak. A doctor studies the monitor connected to the ventilator and tells Denise that Mike's blood pressure is 88. If it drops below 70, Mike won't survive. Meanwhile, the hospital director, Rebecca, senior cardiologist Dr. Turner, and Dr. Allen assess John's situation. They learn that John works part-time and that Denise works at a restaurant. From that, they conclude that the family is struggling financially. When John and Denise enter the management office, they're informed that Mike requires a heart transplant. Turner explains Mike's abnormal heart condition to them. Denise refuses to believe it because Mike was completely healthy just 24 hours earlier. But the doctor explains that it's difficult to accept and that the only alternative is to take Mike home and wait for him to die. After hearing that his beloved son is dying, John immediately decides that Mike will have the heart transplant, even though the surgery will cost $250,000. Despite the overwhelming price, he remains determined. Dr. Turner says that Mike's blood type is B, which should make finding a donor easier. But Rebecca interrupts, saying it's not that simple. The procedure is extremely expensive. John assures Rebecca that he has insurance that also covers Mike. But Rebecca disagrees, explaining that his insurance doesn't cover the transplant. John insists, and she says they'll review the insurance file again. In the meantime, however, they must make a cash deposit before Mike can be placed on the donor list. They need to pay a 30% down payment, which comes to nearly $75,000. John has only $1,000 in his bank account. Their son is dying, but the hospital administration seems concerned only with the money. John and Denise leave the office devastated when Dr. Allen stops them. She explains that this is the best hospital for heart transplant surgery, so transferring Mike somewhere else would be a mistake. She advises them to contact their insurance company or the Children's Aid Ministry, since both may have financial assistance available. If they want to save Mike, he has to stay at this hospital. From that moment on, John begins his desperate mission to save his son. First, he goes to the HR department to discuss his insurance coverage. But to John's surprise, the HR officer tells him that his insurance policy provides only $20,000 and doesn't cover the transplant. John protests, explaining that his son is critically ill and will die if he isn't placed on the donor list. But the HR officer refuses to help. John contacts several assistance services in an attempt to raise money, but none of them give him the answer he's hoping for. One day, he receives a notification from his insurance company saying that his appeal has been approved. He rushes to Rebecca, thrilled that he has finally received approval. But Rebecca informs him that he completed the wrong paperwork. The new policy doesn't include any coverage for the transplant. The disappointment, grief, and helplessness are overwhelming. In this situation, an ordinary working-class man has almost no chance. John and Denise do what many struggling families would do. They begin raising money from friends and relatives. But poor people often have poor friends. After the entire fundraising campaign, John manages to collect only $4,000. $75,000 still feels impossibly far away. He starts selling his household appliances. Jimmy suggests that he share his story with a well-known reporter because people might be willing to help. The film also shows how indifferent some people can be, as one man buys John's color TV for less than $20. They visit a TV news reporter that evening and tell him about their desperate situation. But the reporter only expresses sympathy and offers no real help. After selling all of his household appliances, John manages to raise $16,000. He even sells his wedding ring for only $90. It shows just how helpless a person can become. The world can be cruel. John pays the hospital $6,000. But while he's there, he receives a call from Denise, who tells him through tears that the hospital is preparing to discharge Mike. Shocked and outraged, John rushes to the hospital, where he finds Dr. Turner talking to a wealthy man who is also waiting for heart surgery. Turner's attitude toward this wealthy patient is completely different. John asks Turner for a private meeting because he knows Turner approved the decision to discharge Mike. Inside the room, John argues that the hospital performs hundreds of heart procedures every year and earns millions of dollars. Why can't you perform just one surgery for the sake of humanity? Turner refuses to help, insisting that he doesn't make hospital policy. But this time, John isn't asking anymore. He pulls out a revolver, presses it against Turner's chest, and tells him to do exactly what he says. Otherwise, he'll kill him. Terrified, Turner has no choice but to cooperate. John enters the emergency ward and locks the entrance. Most people flee when they see the gun, but John quickly secures the doors, leaving only a handful of people inside. They become his hostages. Among them are a couple, Mitch and Julie, who were injured in a car accident because Mitch was drunk, an immigrant mother named Rosa carrying her sick child, and Lester, whose finger has been badly injured. Another couple, Stephen and Miriam, who are expecting a baby, and several hospital staff members, including a security guard and Alan, a nurse, and a junior emergency room doctor. John cuts the power supply and smashes the surveillance camera, but a security guard catches him doing it and immediately calls the police. The police arrive within minutes. Lieutenant Frank, the lead hostage negotiator, contacts John and tries to intimidate him. But John is prepared. His only demand is that Rebecca place Mike on the heart transplant list. Frank then tries to appeal to John's emotions, but John refuses to back down. Inside the emergency room, Miriam begins crying in pain. Dr. Allen tries to comfort both her and her worried husband. John speaks to him calmly and politely, asking what he's hoping for. The man quietly replies that he only wants his child to be born healthy. Denise stays with Mike as his blood pressure continues to drop. A doctor constantly monitors his condition and gives him a bodybuilding action figure to comfort him. Meanwhile, Gus, the head of the police department, arrives at the scene, looking more like a celebrity than a police chief. It's also clear that Gus has a strained relationship with Frank. By now, all of the hostages in the emergency room have gotten to know one another. One of the nurses explains that Mike's illness might have been detected much earlier during a routine examination, but the doctor ignored the warning signs to receive incentives from the insurance company, allowing the company to continue making money. This shocking revelation causes the hostages to sympathize with John while also exposing the flaws in America's healthcare system. John continues waiting for a miracle because, at this point, only a miracle can save Mike's life. We then see a flashback to the accident that happened earlier in the film. Frank contacts John and asks if he would be willing to release some of the hostages, but John insists that Mike's name must be placed on the transplant list first. During the conversation, Alan informs John that Miriam urgently needs to be transferred to the maternity ward. John agrees to release some of the hostages, but Mitch suddenly attacks him.
Hey, baby, get the gun! Pick up that gun! There you go, baby!
Julie quickly helps John overpower and handcuff Mitch. John releases Stephen, Miriam, and Rosa. As they leave the hospital, they publicly express their support for John in front of the television cameras. Rebecca informs Denise that they've decided to place Mike's name on the transplant list. But it's only a trap, so Denise will call John and convince him to release the remaining hostages. Gus is focused entirely on protecting his reputation. As police chief, he refuses to negotiate directly with a criminal, so he comes up with his own plan to capture John. He orders an officer to crawl through an air vent while Frank and Rebecca keep John distracted. Mike's condition becomes extremely critical, making the entire situation even more emotional. Everyone inside the emergency room, along with the crowd gathered outside, is brought to tears as John speaks to Mike over the phone. Even Rebecca begins to break down. She realizes how heartless she's been, and for the first time, she truly feels remorse. Just then, a sniper fires. John notices the attack too late and is shot in the shoulder. Despite the injury, he manages to overpower the officer who entered through the air vent. In front of the cheering crowd outside, he uses the officer as a human shield and repeats his final demand. John declares that he is willing to kill himself, donate his own heart, and save his son's life. That is now his only demand.
Son is very sick, and he needs some help.
The gun down, John.
My son is sick. Sick help. I am not gonna bury my son. My son's gonna bury me.
John declares that he is willing to kill himself, donate his own heart, and save his son's life. That is now his only demand. Everyone is stunned and shocked. However, John convinces Dr. Turner to carry out the procedure, and the security guard, Max, confirms John's true intentions. John says his goodbyes to Mike. With his final words, he's ready to shoot himself in the head with the only bullet he brought. Yes, his revolver had been empty the entire time except for that single bullet. Meanwhile, the girl from the accident has died. Her body is brought to the hospital for a post-mortem examination. This is the miracle John has been waiting for, but by now, he's unaware of it and is fully prepared to die. When Rebecca discovers that the young woman's heart is a perfect match for Mike, she becomes overwhelmed with excitement and immediately tells Denise. Denise can hardly believe it, but she desperately wants to tell John. John picks up the walkie-talkie but doesn't say a word because he knows Denise will try to stop him from sacrificing himself. Denise rushes toward the operating room to tell everyone that the donor heart will arrive in just 15 minutes. The scene ends here. In next scene, we see that John releases all of the hostages. Lester then pretends to be John and surrenders to the police. As John enters the operating room with Mike, Frank, who witnessed the switch, quietly allows John to stay and watch his son's surgery before placing him under arrest. John disguises himself as a surgeon so he can remain by Mike's side during the operation. 3 months later, John's actions have sparked a nationwide debate about the American healthcare system. John is ultimately convicted, guilty of kidnapping and unjust, incarcerate action, but not of attempted murder or armed criminal conduct. The movie ends on a deeply emotional yet inspiring note. Mike has made a full recovery, and Lester and Dean don't see John as a criminal. They see him as a father who refused to let his son die.
Hey John, you my hero.
Sometimes, the greatest heroes aren't soldiers, superheroes, or millionaires. They're ordinary parents willing to sacrifice everything for the people they love. John Q is more than just a hostage thriller. It's a heartbreaking story about a father's unconditional love. Faced with an impossible choice, John refused to give up on his son even when the entire world seemed to stand against him. His courage sparked a conversation that reached far beyond one hospital, forcing people to question a system where the value of a life could depend on the size of a bank account. In the end, John loses his freedom, but he saves what matters most, his son's life. And sometimes, that's the greatest victory anyone could ever achieve. Thanks for watching, and remain fair in all circumstances.